All right, Saagar, what's on your radar?
Well, we've got exactly 8 days to go until the presidential election. It's a crucial time for any presidential campaign because while people like me focus on this stuff 24/7, 365, the truth is most research that we have shows that the majority of the American public doesn't really start to tune into the election until about 3 weeks out, which means that this period is absolutely critical in terms of public messaging. It's a time when closing arguments can reach their height. And it's a time when messages must be carefully curated and every word matters. That's why my mouth was basically left open yesterday when I was watching CNN's State of the Union and White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows was pressed on the administration's plan to stop the spread of coronavirus. And this is apparently the best that he could come up with.
Groups and family groups. First it was large groups. Now it's small groups.
It's
now
coming from all sorts of places.
Well,
it's coming from all sorts of places because the pandemic's out of control.
So here's what we have to do. We're not going to control the pandemic. We are going to control the fact that we get vaccines, therapeutics, and other mitigation areas.
Why aren't we going to get control of the pandemic?
Because it is a contagious virus, just like the flu.
Yeah, but why not make efforts to contain it?
Well, we are making efforts to contain it.
By running all over the country, not wearing a mask?
Jake,
that's what the vice president's doing.
We can get into the back.
Can't even believe it. 8 days until the election. That second highest ranking official in the whole White House saying can't get the control of the pandemic, and that the only option we have is to focus on therapeutics. Here's the thing. I actually accept the validity of that position. Perhaps things are too screwed at this point to even try to contain it, and this is our only option. But as a matter of politics, I cannot overstate how dramatically out of step this is with public opinion and the electoral moment. Friday was literally the worst single-day record for the number of coronavirus cases in the United States, sparking more fears about a possible third wave of cases in the U.S. Regardless of how you feel about what should be done empirically about coronavirus, it's important to actually understand the public dynamics at play and how Meadows' move plays into the worst caricatures of the administration's handling of the virus and focuses on an area where Trump long ago lost the American people. Recall, the latest New York Times Siena poll found that a majority of all Americans feel that the worst is yet to come with the pandemic. Also recall that within that poll, Americans say they trust Biden over Trump to handle coronavirus better by a 12-point margin. Corona is literally the last thing that the Trump campaign or the White House should want to talk about before the election. Their best strategy is one that they actually articulated to us in the very early days of the pandemic. Over and over, Crystal and I would press the Trump campaign on this show and say, how are you going to turn things around? And over, they had the same answer. Well, by the time of the election, we'll be talking about economic recovery, not the pandemic. Now, that was a very sound strategy at the time, and even today, it remains the correct move, because the only issue Trump has led Biden on for months is the economy, where even today, he remains approximately tied with him on that issue. The only problem? Well, as you all know, stimulus negotiations are stuck. Nancy Pelosi on CNN yesterday said that she and the secretary are still at odds on some legislative language, which is Washington speak for she's still delaying ahead of the election and she doesn't want to admit it. At this point, barring some sort of miracle, we can be reasonably certain there is going to be no stimulus bill, which, if there ever was a last chance for Trump, I think that's basically what it was. And yes, while I primarily blame Nancy Pelosi for holding up the stimulus bill in this particular instance, we cannot forget many Senate Republicans don't even want to pass such a bill and may not vote for it, and that the White House dilly-dallied for months by not pressing for one and leaving themselves so vulnerable until literally the very last moment when Pelosi could jerk them around. I'm generally a believer that what politicians do tactically doesn't matter nearly as much as their core message and how it resonates with macroeconomic and political conditions driving the country. Today, here's the way I see those two most important trends. 30 million people on unemployment, low-skilled workers unable to find jobs. I can see around me as it gets colder how restaurants after restaurant, they're closing, outdoor dining, possibly facing ruin. No stimulus. I see Washington doing nothing to help, leading to economic despair for many millions that will course through this country for months. At the same time, I look at the front page of every newspaper on the country on Saturday when I'm trying to enjoy my time off, and I see that the U.S. has a record number of coronavirus cases. What is the White House's closing argument in relation to those trends? On the pandemic, it's not much we can do. And on the economy, they don't have a real credible claim. as to actively trying or working to make things better on that front, no matter how things were for you in your life back in 2019. In a way, they've actually maneuvered themselves into the wrong side of public opinion and public sentiment on the two most pressing matters before the people. And the most enraging part about all of this is how easy it makes Joe Biden's campaign. The guy can literally barely talk and just hides in his house all day. Yesterday, he called a lid in the morning. He decided to take another day off the campaign trail 9 days out. All the guy has to do is post photos of himself in a mask and send out statements slamming Mark Meadows about the pandemic, and he gets to be on the right side of public opinion. I've long believed the only way that Trump could pull off a win after his failure to take coronavirus seriously in February and March was some sort of act of God shock to the electoral system, the way that the James Comey letter was in 2016. And as the days tick by, and as Ruth Bader Ginsburg's death failed to mobilize public opinion, it's becoming increasingly clear to me that the decision to take an accommodationist tone of the virus and the failure in the dog days of April and May to not pursue another stimulus bill may have ultimately doomed the president. Now, maybe I'm wrong, and if I am, I will probably never believe a poll again in my entire life. But if I'm not, then this is a time for the American right to take note. The libertarian instinct to disregard the virus in the early days and to not pursue fiscal stimulus will doom us to rule by a technocratic neoliberal elite under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris for perhaps a decade or more to come. And if that is the case, then in reality, anyone who pursued such a policy should never have a say in the future of the Republican Party ever again. And it's kind of incredible to me, Crystal. You look and you can see these underlying trends like I laid out on the economics. I was just looking today about how high-skilled workers are actually largely, not only entirely recovered, their job market is doing pretty well, but the low-skilled work, what do you think?
Yep.
Right? And then you can go and you can see even Wall Street is saying, you know, the pandemic boon to the extent that there was one, like Amazon and Netflix stock, that's over because that's all priced in. They were like, yeah, we got a bunch of new users in the first couple of months, but now, you know, things are just back to 2020, which means the higher strata of the economy is not going to be revving like it was, and the lower is, you know, getting hollowed out day after day after day, and will continue to be so for months. At the same time, we have a record number of cases, and the White House chief of staff is out there saying we're not going to get control of the pandemic.
Not going to get control of it.
It's crazy.
It is, and it bears noting over and over again. Yes, of course, Donald Trump did not create the pandemic, right? No one says that. No one says that. But this state of political affairs, and frankly, this state of affairs in terms of our national life, was completely avoidable. Donald Trump had some of the highest approval ratings of his presidency in the early days of the pandemic when he decided for that brief period to actually take it seriously. People have realistic expectations about how much control you can have over this virus, but they want to see you actually try. So when he was doing briefings, even though they were sort of like crazy at times, even though like they were far from perfect, the fact that he had the coronavirus task force and it appeared like he was trying to do something, people wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. And obviously on the economy, there was so much more he could do. And I go back to something that we observed at the very beginning of this pandemic, which was who Trump was meeting with. He wasn't talking to heads of labor unions. He wasn't talking to workers. He was talking to CEOs. He was talking to Wall Street executives and corporate CEOs, all of whom wanted to put pressure on him to keep the economy open and downplay this thing and keep the stock market juicing. So that was the side he's erred on, and he has never, ever course corrected from that direction. I really think the failure lies there. So it's where, you know, the libertarian bent of the Republican Party meets with Trump's proclivity to want to talk to like the captains and titans of industry and think that they really know what's going on and have the best interest of the country at heart. That's where things really ended up getting ugly here. It was completely avoidable.
No, it was completely avoidable. It never had to be this way. And you're maneuvering yourself into the wrong side of public opinion on both things. And again, you can accept the validity of these positions, but you always have to look and be like, okay, how does the country itself feel? And if you wanted to get them to a place where they were like, no, what, we can't get the pandemic out of control, we should go on therapeutics, then you have to have some credibility with the American people to move them, but they don't have that. They're distrusted on the virus by a 2/3 margin of the American public. Even Republicans barely trust the White House whenever they talk about corona. Now they have an outbreak in the vice president's office, 9 days.
The vice president who was the head of the coronavirus task force, by the way.
It's a bad look. I mean, you can't blame a deadly virus for getting in there, but you can say, hey, you guys haven't been taking precautions. Your overwhelming public messaging on this has been trying to get past it, like an accommodationist tone, and that's just not what people want to hear.
Well,
and I think they are going to pay for it.
And the other thing out of their closing message, their inspiring closing message that you left down, is they think that this Hunter stuff is going to save them. And it's ridiculous. Right. Like, they think that the Hunter, and we're going to talk more about all of this later, but they think that the Hunter Biden laptop story is like WikiLeaks in the way that helped save them in 2016. It's really more like, especially with some of the like more salacious crap that they've been putting out over the weekend and over last week, it's really more like Access Hollywood, where it seems to the people involved like it's this really big deal, but ultimately the American people are like, I want a job and for my kids to go to school. Thank you very much.
That is, I'm glad that you said that, because at the time they thought that Access Hollywood was like the bit, they're like, it's over, blah, blah, blah. No, because the thing is about WikiLeaks is that it was a leak and a public thing that linked to how Clinton would conduct governance. That's what it was.
Yeah.
Now, with Biden, I actually think it does link to how he might conduct governance. But the Trump campaign, until like just now, has not been talking about corruption, has not been talking about China, and has not been talking about trade, globalism, and so much more. So their critique does not match with the scandal.
Yeah.
They've been all in on the radical left social stuff, which doesn't work and it doesn't connect in any way. So they really lost their way in the ability in order to mobilize this to their advantage. And in the same way, everybody knew Trump was like kind of a gross guy and had 3 wives. So they're like, it's priced in.
Yeah.
That's what Access Hollywood was.
Indeed.
All right, I'm looking forward to your Radar Next, Crystal.